Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing Lesson 13, Sharing Resources. This is Scott Neal, and today we'll be discussing Exam Objective 4.1 for the 70-687 exam. And we're going to be covering in today's brief lecture the difference between any folder sharing, public folder sharing, and home groups. Each of these serves its own unique purpose depending on the IT environment that you serve in, and we are going to try to differentiate between each of these sharing environments. We'll also talk briefly about configuring a home group and setting up libraries. We'll talk about a little bit about what is a library and how they work. We're going to be talking about OneDrive today in brief detail, explaining how it works. And we'll be talking about sharing folders. We're doing any folder sharing, specifically the difference between sharing permissions and NTFS permissions. And we'll be also talking about configuring and sharing printers on the network. So let's go ahead and get started. Any folder sharing is suitable for larger domain-based networks. It is the typical sharing environment that you see in corporate settings. It does allow for more elaborate security features. For instance, I can micromanage sharing permissions for all my users and give them either read-only or modify access to the shares or eliminate them from the share altogether. We can also access or limit access to these folders rather to only people who are authorized network users with a valid account and password. And indeed, you will see this in all of the folder sharing environments, that we can limit access only to authorized users. One of the nice things about any folder sharing is the ability to share files from any location on the file tree. Therefore, I can keep their original location, not have to worry about removing, moving, or locating those files to a different folder. I can simply share the folder as it is, if I so choose. So, any folder sharing is probably the most versatile of sharing environments. However, it does have a significantly higher overhead in general than the other folder sharing environments that we're discussing today. Public folder sharing, by contrast, is probably the simplest way to share data between two computers. Therefore, it is suitable for smaller businesses where we expect our users to individually manage their own shared folder content on the machines. It does require moving all the data I want to be shared to specifically the public folder. And I also have to remember that all of my network users are going to have the same permissions to that folder, and it really is kind of limited as far as the security of that particular folder. Okay? So, last but not least, home group sharing is fairly new. It came out with Windows 7. It is designed and better suited for home users, and it kind of brings together the best of both worlds, a nice compromise between any folder sharing and public folder sharing, where we can come in and allow sharing from our default library of folders. It does require setting up a home group on our network, which means that we find a device, we set up a home group on that device, and it will generate a pass key. We will use that pass key for each of the devices we connect to the home group. Once we do that, we will have read-only access by default to the libraries for each of those devices on the network. I can, however, micromanage sharing permissions almost like I could with any folder sharing and give read-only or modify access to those shares. Now, as far as using libraries is concerned, as I said before, home groups by default will use these library environments to share the data between our devices. There are some significant differences between using libraries in the Windows 8.1 environment than there are in previous Windows environments. When you open the File Explorer window nowadays, in the left pane you will see that I have my favorites and network folders as we did from the earlier versions. However, when it comes to the libraries, we will notice that they are now missing by default from this folder. They're still there, we just are going to have to go in and enable them. So we'll have to go in through the navigation pane and actually enable those libraries in order for them to show up in the File Explorer. Fairly simple process, you just have to remember to turn them on. The nice thing about libraries is that it will allow your users to aggregate or consolidate files in multiple locations, even if they're on multiple systems, into a single folder so that they actually appear that they're sitting on a local drive on the machine in the same folder. This is very reminiscent to what we can do in the Linux file system setting as well. Here you see a typical library folder, and as you may note if you're running Windows environments from previous editions, there are 4 library folders available: Documents, Pictures, Music, and Videos. Each of these can have permissions set for each of these folders for our particular users in our home group environment. Now when it comes to creating a home group, whenever I go into and set up my laptop or my desktop and I turn on the network connection and I set it for a private network, Windows 8.1 is going to automatically attempt to detect an existing home group on the network. One of 2 things is going to happen. If it does not detect a home group through the Network and Sharing Center, the Network and Sharing Center control panel will then contain a link that will allow you to connect and create a home group through the Home Group Wizard. When you go into the Home Group Wizard, if you choose to create a home group, you're going to generate a passkey, and that passkey is going to be used to actually connect not only the home group device, the central device that you created that home group, but all the other devices will have that passkey entered manually to add them to the home group as well. This is very similar in process to what you may do, say, to set up secured Wi-Fi access on a particular device. The process is similar, except now you've actually created a little network of systems on your home network. And those systems will allow for the exchange of data between the libraries. Now, the process is slightly different. If it does detect a home group on the network, it will then allow through the Network and Sharing control panel to join that home group, provided you have the appropriate passkey from the original home group device. Here you see 3 screens that you would normally see when setting up the home group. In the central screen here, you notice that when I connected my computer up to the network and set it up for private, that the home group was not detected. So it allowed me to go in and set up a home group, or allow me the option to go in and create a home group from this system. What you see at the bottom of the screen when it says creating a home group is the ability to share with other home group members each of these libraries or folders. The Pictures folder, the Videos folder, the Music folder, the Documents folder, and last but not least, the printers and devices. And here I can go in and micromanage the shared settings for each of these folders. Now, when it comes to working with home groups, shared home group libraries of all the computers on the network are going to appear in the File Explorer in the home group container. To modify the default home group sharing configuration, I'm going to have to select one of those shared libraries in the file folder and click Share in the toolbar. Once I do that, I can toggle other home groups users' access to the specific libraries from read to read or write. Or, of course, I can delete that access altogether for that specific device. It is important to note that all of the devices that are allowing sharing of the libraries will also show up in the File Explorer. As far as sharing the public folder goes, as I said before, this is probably the simplest way to share data between devices. And I can do this quite simply by going into the Network Sharing Center through the Advanced Sharing settings and turning on File Sharing. In this instance, we are doing just that. I've gone into the Network Sharing Center, and in Advanced Sharing Settings, I have selected Turn on Sharing so anyone with network access can read and write files in the public folders. Once I do that, I can indeed allow access to that public folder for anyone connecting to the device. I can also require password authentication to that device to allow access to the public folder in order to help further secure that folder from unauthorized access. Now, any folder sharing is a little bit different. As I said before, this is generally the process or the sharing method for larger, more security conscious networks. With any folder sharing, I will have full control over the material on the computer. I will determine what is shared, what users or user groups will be permitted to access that shared material, and to what degree of access I want each user granted to that specific material. Here in the Advanced Sharing tab of a particular folder, I can go in and say share the folder, and here I can actually, through the Advanced Sharing tab, I can actually create a share name. That share name will be, of course, the share name that my users will connect to through their file system. And so that makes it very easy, by the way, for mapping drives for my particular users. They won't have to remember a long file path name. I could create a share name that's based on the local or the machine that the share sits on, and then of course the actual share name I wish to call it. Okay. One of the other things I can do through the Advanced Sharing tab is micromanage the permissions for specific users or user groups to allow sharing access to that particular folder. Okay. Managing share permissions for network users to access shared with password protected sharing enabled. User accounts, of course, will have to be created on the host computer. However, if I do have a computer that's hooked up to the domain, it will allow me to use domain accounts however, the domain accounts are going to have to be available on both computers so that I can allow for the sharing of data between those two systems through that particular folder. I'm going to also have to grant them the appropriate permissions for each user or user group that I have selected access for that particular folder. Here, for instance, in this particular share permissions for a folder, I have, as you can see, 3 types of permissions that are available. Full control, which allows me carte blanche access to the data in the folder, including taking ownership of that data. Change permissions, which will allow me to modify the data, but not particularly make any real changes to the permissions or take ownership of that data. And of course, read permissions or read-only permissions, which will allow me, in a nutshell, access to the data specifically for reading it. I won't be able to modify it. And of course, for executables, I will still be able to execute any executables in that folder. So, let's re-clarify these share permissions. Read permissions, I can display my folder names, file data, and attributes, run those executables, and of course access subfolders within the share folder. Change permissions will allow me to do all these, plus create or delete folders, add delete folders or files to the folders, and of course append any data in those files, and change the file attributes. Full control, however, does allow me the ability to do everything in the change permission, including change file permissions and take ownership of the files. It is important to note that NTFS and share permissions work separately from each other. This particular lecture today, we're not going to be talking about NTFS permissions in detail, but it is important to understand that there are significant differences. NTFS permissions do provide significantly higher level of granularity for folders and files. We use share permissions to provide only 3 levels of access: full control, change, or read. NTFS permissions then will be used to further modify any folders or subfolders within that particular shared folder. We'll cover this later. On networks already possessing well-planned systems of NTFS permissions, some network administrators may elect not to use share permissions, but instead rely heavily on NTFS permissions instead. Let's talk a minute about OneDrive. OneDrive used to be called the SkyDrive. It is Microsoft's cloud-based storage service that's available to all Microsoft email users. Microsoft, as we have seen with Windows 7, now Windows 8 and 8.1, we are beginning to see a steady push towards using the OneDrive cloud-based storage that Microsoft promotes as a means of distributing or sharing data or retaining data for our use. Microsoft, as far as the operating system installation, encourages you to install your OneDrive through your Microsoft account. Now, you can bypass this as part of the installation process. However, as you will determine if you do an install of 8.1, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to do the bypass of this. OneDrive storage does have some advantages. It does allow me to access my data both through the web or through a OneDrive desktop application. For instance, Office 365, latest versions of Office, and other applications will allow me to link directly to my OneDrive account to utilize those files in that OneDrive folder for that particular desktop application. And of course, we have the Metro app as well that will allow me to connect to the OneDrive account. This is my OneDrive account here, and as I said earlier, I can use this OneDrive account for several things. I can use it, of course, for cloud storage of my personal documents. I can publicly share documents and files through the OneDrive folder, and I can do this simply by sharing files with a link or folders with a link that will allow and then email that link out and allow my users to connect to my publicly shared or shared data to specific users. Now that we've talked a little bit about sharing files, sharing folders, we've talked about different types of sharing, we probably ought to turn a little bit of our attention to printing. There are some terms that we need to be concerned with when it comes to Windows printing and Windows printing architecture. Windows uses these terms sometimes a little differently than we're used to using these terms, so it's probably good that we clarify some of these. A print server is a computer or a standalone device whose purpose is to receive and manage print jobs from clients and then send those print jobs specifically to the print devices, which may either be locally attached or connected over a network interface. A print device represents the actual physical hardware, the printer as you would call it, that produces hard copy documents on paper. In Windows world, a printer is not a physical hardware device. It is actually the software interface through which the computer will communicate with that specific print device. And it does this through what we call a printer driver. A printer driver is essential to running that actual device because it converts the print jobs generated through applications into a string of commands that are going to be interpreted by each specific print device, just like any other device driver. Now, installing a print device requires me selecting a specific manufacturer and model of the print device, generally by going into the Add a Printer wizard, specifying the port or other interface that the computer will use to access the print device, and then being sure to install that appropriate printer driver, either automatically or through the use of some sort of CD or USB driven device driver, or by pointing to a specific device driver on my local machine. When it comes to adding a local printer, well, this is very advantageous for smaller computing environments. Most of our homes, for instance, have a local printer attached specifically to our laptop or desktop environment. It is directly connected to any computer running 8.1 or even another version of Windows, and it does this either through a USB port or through an old-time printer LPT1 port, or in some cases through the NIC card. This will allow local users to print their own jobs, and users can also elect to share that printer with other network users. Now, sharing a printer. In order to share a printer, I'm going to have to enable network discovery and file and printer sharing via the Network and Sharing Center to do this. And once I do that, I do have the ability to also enable password protected sharing. In order to do this, I will have to allow my users or require my users to log on. They're going to have an account on the system, and that account is going to have the appropriate permissions to use the printer. Here you see an actual screenshot of me trying to turn on or share a printer. In this instance, I haven't shared the printer, but I can go in and share the printer and then render the print jobs on the client system. One of the other options that you see here is listing that particular printer in the directory. This is particularly useful in a domain environment where I have multiple printers in that I would like to allow my users to easily connect to without having to go in and fumble around and find the printers. We can simply list them in the directory, and that will ease the process of adding the printers to their local machines. One of the other options that we have that's we can micromanage on the specific print devices is printer security. And as you can see here, there are 4 types of printer security options. There's print, manage this printer, manage documents, and of course special permissions.